So Tuesday was a really bad day for Democrats. They seem to have this idea that as a party, they could run on this platform that doesn't necessarily stand for anything, but is against Trump, against President Trump. So, you know, they've basically, with their rhetoric, through the people that they support, through their action, they have basically done everything they can to oppose President Trump, basically every step of the way of his presidency. It's their basic tactic, and they're hoping that that can drive them to victory. Obviously, one of the things long term they have in mind, or would hope to do, would be to obviously impeach Trump. Obviously, he's done nothing wrong. That's not stopping the talk from people like Maxine Waters and others of impeachment and collusion with Russia and all this other nonsense. Of course, to actually be able to impeach the president, you have to be able to have a majority of the House basically vote for impeachment. Then it goes to the Senate, and 2/3 of the Senate has to actually ratify the impeachment. The Democrats don't control the House or the Senate right now. So a key aspect of them being able to even think about beginning the impeachment process, let alone following through with it, obviously, would be to gain back a majority of the House. So running on this anti-Trump platform, Democrats were 1,000% behind the candidate in the Georgia special election in Georgia's 6th district, who was Jon Ossoff, who is a Democrat that tries to come off as a little bit more moderate. He tries to come off as someone who's a little bit more of a middle of the road sort of character. On Tuesday, he lost the election. And it was almost like a small repeat of the Hillary Clinton loss, when Hillary Clinton lost the election, in the sense that the Democrats across the board were and continue to be completely devastated by this loss. So Georgia, that district at least, is a R+9 district, so-called. What that means is that basically an average Republican running should be able to win by 9 percentage points, or around there. The reason there was an election in the first place is because Tom Price, who now serves as the Secretary of Health and Human Services, was the person who filled that position previously. He got appointed by Trump. That left a vacancy, and then called for a special election, which is just any election that basically isn't during the usual presidential elections and midterms. So it's an R+9 district. Tom Price won that district by 20 points. He won it by 20 points, so he way overperformed. Donald Trump barely squeaked by in the presidential election. He won that district by 1 point. The Democrats and the media and Hollywood, of course, were solidly behind Ossoff, and they really wanted him to win. The amount of money that was poured into his campaign was actually a record for the most amount of campaign contributions for a House election, an election for a member of the House of Representatives. it actually broke the record. It was $24 million about that this guy Jon Ossoff got in campaign contributions. Compared to Karen Handel, who was the Republican running, she only got about $4.5 million. So he outspent her, by many times in terms of campaign contributions. Now, keep in mind, this is an R+9 district, so it should be a pretty easy win for a Republican, normally. There was a lot of sort of variables at play here, but the main thing is that during the runoff, it was basically Ossoff versus a bunch of other Republicans to see who were going to be the two nominees, the two candidates that were going to go forward to represent the two parties. It was basically Ossoff, I believe, was running alone versus all these different Republicans that are running. So that split the vote up, obviously. Because of this, Ossoff got something like 40 some odd % of the vote. And Democrats pointed at that and said, well, wow, this is an R+9 district. He got 40 something % of the vote. And they basically thought that they could turn over this district from Republican to Democrat. They thought they could actually win this district. Then, of course, the polls all showed that Ossoff was more likely to win than Handel. There was basically on the 19th, there was something like a 55% chance that Ossoff was going to win. Now, the thing that they didn't account for, one of the key things they didn't account for, was the new sort of Trump voter that isn't exactly in the voter database. These are the people who came out and haven't voted in years or have never voted and voted for Trump. These are the same people that turned out to vote for Handel. And Karen Handel wound up winning. It was a devastating loss, basically, for the Democrats, because they thought for sure that Ossoff was going to be able to pull off this miraculous victory. And of course, everyone in the media, the Democrats, Hollywood, were all saying that it was a referendum on Trump, basically, a referendum on Trump. Well, they actually lost, and they are now in the middle of trying to evaluate why they lost. This would definitely be a good time for Democrats to have some degree of self-reflection and to sort of look at this overall tactic of just being anti-Trump and maybe trying to rework that a little bit, because clearly it's not winning elections. They are now 0 for 4 in all of these special elections that have taken place since Trump came into office. And, it was just a devastating loss. It was just an absolutely devastating loss for the Democrats. It was literally like, the night of the election all over again. It was just completely and utterly ridiculous. You had a candidate who had, many times more campaign contributions than the opponent. You had somebody who the media and the establishment, so to speak, was fully behind, and you ultimately had these polls that were saying he was going to win, but ultimately it wasn't a victory for the Democrats whatsoever. That being said, I don't think it's quite as much of a victory for Republicans either, although it certainly is in my point of view. You've got, keep in mind, this is an R+9 district, so an average Republican should, in theory, win by about 9 points. Karen Handel won by about 4 points. Trump only won that district by 1 point. So you've got a case where Karen Handel did underperform a bit in terms of the Cook PVI, the so-called Cook PVI, the R+9 for that district, and Ossoff did overperform by a few points. So it's not exactly a victory for Republicans, and it may not have. It wouldn't have been a devastating loss for the Democrats either. This election was really not that big of a deal, and when you're looking at the big picture, it sort of got zoomed in on because it's a special election and there was all this attention put towards it. But during a normal election cycle, there would be way more candidates, and there would be way less attention put on individual candidates. But because of the fact that you had this massive amount of campaign money given to this candidate, the most in history for someone trying to get into the House of Representatives, and of course you had the entire media and Democratic establishment behind it. Now, one of the reasons that Ossoff lost was because of the simple fact that the Republicans were successfully able to tie Ossoff to a certain individual, Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader, who is a bit of a kook in her own way, if I do say so myself. She is basically one of the figureheads for the sort of anti-Trump movement. She always panders towards the portions of the Democratic base that thrive on sort of identity politics, and she sort of just pushes this idea that President Trump is so bad that all we have to do is basically oppose him. And unfortunately, what that winds up doing is that riles up that, sort of charges up the Democratic base. But that type of language, that type of rhetoric does nothing to bring the sort of people that are a little bit more centrist, a little bit more moderate, just the sort of quote-unquote average, everyday people, it doesn't bring those people in whatsoever. And you can charge up your base, and you're going to have a large base. You can do pretty well, in terms of getting people to vote and turnout and everything like that. But you can't really win elections that way. You have to be able to bring in the more moderate people. And that is where the Democratic Party is absolutely failing, but they seem to continue to double down on it. However, after the just massive loss from Ossoff, I think one of my favorite comments about that was Kellyanne Conway actually tweeted after Ossoff lost that I am laughing my ass off. So I thought that was pretty clever. I thought that was pretty funny. But now the targets have been put on Nancy Pelosi herself, and there is actually a split now in the Democratic Party. There's going to be a potential shakeup in the future, and there is definitely some turmoil going on in the Democratic Party as they squirm around to try to figure out how to make their political brand a little less toxic. So this is from Politico. Pelosi's Democratic critics plot to replace her. A dozen unhappy House Democrats met Thursday afternoon to discuss if and how they can replace Representative Nancy Pelosi as Minority Leader. Led by Representatives Kathleen Rice, Democrat New York, Seth Moulton, Democrat Massachusetts, and Tim Ryan, Democrat Ohio, at least some in the group believe Pelosi has to go in order for Democrats to have a chance to win back the House in November 2018. Ryan unsuccessfully challenged Pelosi for the party leader back in November. Quote, there are many more people today, even from November, who are much more vocal, who have approached us and said, I'm done, we need to move forward, and we need to get a new leadership team in place, Rice said after the hour-long meeting. There is a consensus, I think, that we can reach in the caucus that allows for a new leadership team to be put in place in a time that's well before, hopefully, November of next year. Rice, Moulton, and others leaving the meeting said no decisions were made about their next steps, but they plan to meet again to discuss and continue the discussions. Quote, the takeaway from the meeting is that we want to win again in 2018, Moulton said, noting he's seen a shift in the caucus since Pelosi's leadership race last year. Quote, I think people see the stakes more clearly. The unhappiness within Democratic ranks has spiked since their loss in the special election in Georgia on Tuesday. Republicans spent millions of dollars on TV ads tying Democratic candidate Jon Ossoff to Pelosi, a tactic that has been used extensively and successfully by the GOP since 2010. However, Pelosi and her allies don't think her Democratic detractors have nearly enough support to topple her. Quote, I would say that too if I were her, but I can tell you, I've been speaking to a lot of members on the caucus who've supported her in the past, as have I, but the time has come. So, in other words, she's just been there a little bit too long. Maybe it's just time to retire old Nancy Pelosi. But Pelosi was defiant in a Thursday news conference, even mocking intra-party critics, suggesting they're more interested in promoting themselves than helping the party win back the majority. Quote, when it comes to personal ambition and having fun on TV, have your fun. I love the arena, I thrive on competition, and I welcome the discussion, Pelosi said. So, the Democratic Party is in a bit of turmoil right now. They, especially with this loss, the loss of Ossoff, they're reeling from that loss, absolutely. And you've got the different portions of the Democratic Party. You've got sort of this party that wants to just double down on the sort of anti-Trump rhetoric. You've got the side that also wants to actually try to get some more middle-of-the-road voters in there. So that means maybe having some pro-life Democrats, God forbid, or maybe some pro-Second Amendment Democrats, because unless you do that, unless you push towards being more moderate, you're not going to be able to get those additional voters, those sort of quote-unquote swing voters that you need. It's just not gonna happen, because calling people racist, saying Donald Trump is a Nazi, just doesn't make the average quote-unquote everyday working, Democrat or moderate or independent or Republican or whatever want anything to do with you, quite frankly. So all you've done is riled up your base. You've charged up your base, that 40 or so percent of the Democratic constituency that is basically just always going to be there for the Democratic Party. You're charging them up, and you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and that basket's not enough to win elections, as you can clearly see, because this is now the fourth special election that the Democrats have completely lost, even though they've been saying that Trump is being the most unpopular president ever in the whole entire world, that Democrats should be able to actually win these elections because of the amount of anti-Trump sentiment out there. So key things. The Democrats need to understand that there is the sort of hidden, invisible Trump voter out there. The same people that came out and didn't vote in decades or ever and voted for Trump for the first time are now the same exact people who are coming out to vote for people like Karen Handel, especially when you are promoting this message that is completely 100% anti-Trump. And if you are coming out and saying that, you're the Trump slayer, quote unquote, as they were all calling this guy, what that's going to do is that's going to motivate people on the Republican side to vote even more. And again, that kind of rhetoric does not attract the moderate voter. So it's just a terrible strategy. It's a terrible tactic. You see now that the Democratic Party is completely split and is trying to rework themselves. So there may be a shakeup here in the future, and they might actually get rid of Nancy Pelosi. And hey, I am definitely not a person who is usually in the sort of job of giving advice to Democrats. There's a quote out there, I forget by who, but it basically is summed up in, don't get in the way of your enemy killing themselves. And, you know, I'm not necessarily trying to do that. I will say, though, at this point, I am almost starting to feel just the tiniest bit sorry for Democrats, because it is not going too well for them. And again, just to wrap all this up, basically, the Democratic strategy is not working for them. Hopefully they double down on it. Hopefully they just continue. Hopefully they, you know, become even more fragmented, and hopefully we can actually get some real, you know, conservative legislation put through, and hopefully we can move forward with, you know, President Trump's agenda. And the Democrats, they may just not learn from this. It doesn't. There are portions of the Democratic Party that are doubling down, portions that are, you know, trying to sort of be self-reflective. So it remains to be seen what's going to happen with the Democratic Party. They are certainly in turmoil at this point. And yeah, that's about it. I am definitely not tired of winning yet. I can tell you guys that. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave me a comment, and please subscribe. Also, if you want to hear the audio version of this, I will have that uploaded on SoundCloud, and you can follow me on Twitter or like me on Facebook, and I will have the links for all of that in the description. So I hope you have a wonderful day, and may the Force be with you.